Okay, so you hear a lot of talking heads bleeding on and on about how this is left, this is right, that's not leftism, that's not rightism, and I'm today going to tell you that none of them know what the fuck they are talking about. Whether they identify themselves as left, right, up, down, sideways, gay, straight, whatever. My title's a bit misleading in hopes of getting me more clicks, but what this dichotomy really means is quite complicated, and I create this video in an attempt to simplify such. I firmly believe that the terms left and right are relative upon time and location. If we want to catalog all the world's political ideologies, we should use a different and more accurate system. Let's start where the hell left and right had anything to do with politics. Starting in the French Revolution of 1789, the French National Assembly stood on the literal left and right sides of the king during a conference or whatever. The rebels leading the revolution, those who wanted to change the French absolutist regime, stood to the left side of the king. Those who wanted to preserve the regime status quo, those who wanted to conserve, hint hint, stood on the right. And that's where the nomenclature was born. Left equals change, right equals stability. But then those who stood on the left are now considered right 230 years later. Meanwhile, Stalin's Union and Hitler's, NSDAP, were both socialist dictatorial regimes. Why did they hate each other? 74 years later, people fling shit to each other about whether Hitler was left or right, in feeble attempts to poo-poo the other team, which, by the way, is an ad hominem known as reductio ad Hitlerum. So, how do we make these distinctions? And how did Hitler and Stalin, who are both dictators, who's left and who's right? What about the GOP versus the libertarians? What about hippies versus the Democrats? So now we're breaking into the triple-digit IQs. We now came up with the two-dimensional Cartesian chart. We have left and right, whatever the hell that might mean, on the x-axis, and then we have y-axis, which is an indication of personal freedoms or lack thereof. We came up with this system after realizing the left and right are simply inaccurate. Now each politician can fit somewhere on this chart and voila. But wait, you ever hear about anarcho-communists on the bottom left fighting with the anarcho-capitalists on the bottom right? Why is that? Anarcho-communists are on the left and the anarcho-capitalists are on the bottom right. Aren't they supposed to be fighting? No. Well, this is because anarchy is no government whatsoever. Anarcho-communists seek forming a commie tribe or a hangout without a greater governmental force looming above it. Anarcho-capitalists seek forming a capitalist society, with no governmental regulation on money, or where money goes. But just like how Sticks, Hex, and Hammer 666 stated, anarchy itself is a paradox. Anarchy means no government or by any ideological extension, no authority. But hierarchy establishes itself in any interaction between two or more people. Therefore, anarchy can only exist temporarily. So as the number increases, even with these anarcho-communes or anarcho-capitalist economies, there's always a top and always a bottom, an employer and an employee, a leader and a follower, a queen and a worker bee. So once we take Sticks, Hex, and Hammer's cone figure, a cone is a triangle when viewed from the side, and here's what we have. Politics is no longer a dichotomy nor an XY graph, but a trichotomy, a triangle. Since anarchy is anarchy regardless of ANCOM or ANCAP. Either of the two doesn't really give a shit about what the other does because neither believes in having a governmental body to enforce anything or to even say so. I've simplified the trichotomy even further, and this triangle explains three quintessential moral values which are, as you might guess or expect me to say, subjectively prioritized. Since the left and right monikers are inaccurate at best and deadly at worst, I think it is a better system to be replaced with red, green, and blue in homage to the pretty lights on my computer. Red represents equality and at the extremity, communism, just like the Soviet and Chinese flag. Blue represents stability and at the extremity, absolutism, since blue is a tepid color which makes me think of the calm oceans. Green represents freedom, therefore liberty and libertarianism, and at the extreme, anarchy, since green is the color of nature, and nature gives no shits about right or wrong, and Darwinism is true freedom, since obviously animals live in anarchy. Green equals anarchy. Now, no two people will have the same ratio of these three moral values: security, freedom, and equality. And since we're all self-absorbed twats, we impose what's best for us on the rest of the world. And right there is the crux of all political conflict between any human group imaginable. It's not about money, it's not about women, it's about values. Values equals morals, morals equals feelings, and feelings equals subjective. Voila. But Remember, this is too much for your average schmuck or schmuckette to wrap his/her head around, so they instead insist on right and left, since most people think A is bad and B is good. We need more A and not B, and vice versa. Thinking is hard, and going with feelings is easier. The most predominant of feelings being, simply put, self-interest.
But what about the left? They're literally destroying their own country and themselves. This is obviously not self-interest. What's the missing link?
One word: ego. One phrase: the hero complex, where feeling like a hero takes priority over your literal survival, or, in this instance, your rectal integrity. And see upcoming respective video for elaboration. So since the plebs can't understand the triangle, and the triangle is what's going on underneath the politics, what happens in reality is that people organize themselves into a team A and B, and the so-called left and right. This is how most draw the line on the trichotomy in today's Western democracies. The commies are all grouping the Nazis, because if you're not a communist, you're a not C, not communist, not C, haha, get it? Therefore, you must be on the right. Libertarians, absolutists, religious retards, the Republicans, Donald Trump, or anyone opposed to communism in any way, shape, or form are all dumped onto the right. The right now, is just an amalgam of any and all ideologies opposed to communism, since commies are currently the largest group fighting for power, and none of these pieces of the right can fight communism alone. So they must collaborate to fight off the common enemy together, just like how the Soviets and the Allies worked together to fight the Axis in World War II. Even though each of these patches of the right-wing patchwork has their own golden ratio of these three values, these small groups cannot afford not to cooperate, at least for now. But once the big bad common enemy is gone, they will start to disperse again, just like how the liberals split into the Republicans, Democrats, and Libertarians after fighting off the monarchy. Rinse and repeat. And since, as clarified earlier, left just means change and right just means status quo, therefore this is what the left and right division was 230 years ago, back in the Enlightenment period / Revolution time. Meanwhile, today, the Hong Kong versus China conflict can be looked at this way. Yes, the communist regime is right-wing, and the Hong Kong rebels, fighting for democracy, are left-wing. Because again, left equals change the status quo, and right equals preserve it. Hong Kong wants to depart from the status quo, and right means to preserve the status quo. The communist regime must be the status quo.
But ABC isn't the left about freedom?
Everyone appeals to freedom to buy votes, but nobody actually wants freedom if it means that they have to take charge of themselves, so they revert back to the stability and security that authoritarian regimes provide. Hence why the Republican Party even exists. Hence why so many slaves during the Emancipation Proclamation went back to the plantations, because they just couldn't handle all the responsibility and risk associated with the freedom. Hence why we even have civilization built in the first place, and think that it's wrong to kill people that we deem as genetically inferior. So status quo implies stability and order, vice versa for the anti-status quo. The communist state in China provides stability and order rather than equality like it promised back in Mao's time. Hong Kongers wanting democracy is a disruption, ergo antithetical to stability and order. Hence, Hong Kong is the left, and the communist government, at least in the current day China, is the right. So here's another word for that is commonly misused and misunderstood. Liberalism. Ever heard liberalism is a mental disorder? A common slogan you might see on YouTube? To me, that means anything that isn't absolutism. Kings and religious state is a mental disorder. Capitalism, free market, communism, and socialism are all Enlightenment ideas, and those on the left, back in the revolutionary era of France and England, were all considered liberals. But once the left, which at the time was an amalgam of different ideologies who were all opposed to the absolutism that ran the countries in Europe, once the left, in this context, got settled into their secular states free of religious tyranny, they started fighting with each other. And then you have the left and right divide you see in Western democracies today. Literally everyone who lives in a Western democracy and isn't supportive of a religious absolute society is a liberal. So this polarization we see is the liberal left versus the liberal right. But let us not forget how the left and right are relative. These three values still do not change. These three corners of the triangle will always be. Only the politicians and the people change. Now, after you're officially breaking that 4-digit threshold of political IQs, you might ask, well, how is this important? I'm telling you this because people are either evil, stupid, or both, or sometimes both. Whether it's because they really don't understand or they're just trying to get something out of you for their own benefit, I'm here to help you figure out what these people are really after and feeding you some basic level history and fundamental human psychology to further understand today's politicians and what they're really after and what you should do as a common citizen or aspiring politician in your own best interest. In my other video about the big switch, Lincoln and the Republican Party didn't really give a shit about the slaves. They just wanted the union together, slaves or no slaves. The Republican Party values stability, and the Democrats wanted freedom. However, around the 50s or whenever, the Democrat Party was losing traction. Especially after the Great Depression and World War II, people wanted security and stability, which was and still are the core values of the Republican Party within America and is the bluest of the three types of liberalism you find in America. Democrats were becoming obsolete because the Republicans were giving the people exactly what they wanted, which was stability and security. So, how did they get around this? Lyndon B. Johnston's Great Society Plan, aka wealth redistribution. LBJ once stated, "I'll have those niggers voting Democrat for the next 200 years," thus providing the poor black community security under the mask of, quote, freedom from racial inequality. And that right there is how the Democrat Party took a communist turn, hijacked more and more social inequalities like women, immigrants, the poor, etc. And that is how you have the Democrat Party you see today. Now, the people supporting the Dems are obviously completely oblivious to the plans of the politicians. Just like the slaves in the Civil War, the Democrat voters are simply pawns in the chess game. Politicians don't care about their voters, all they want is more votes. Even if they do care about the people, the only way that they would be in a position to make any tangible change in society is to have the power, which still means getting votes, and people only vote for their own best interests. Same could be said about the Republican Party playing chess with Christians. The Christians, at least the ones that are actually worth a shit to God's true word, who keep that pin-pan strong to put your good Christian wife in her place when she mouths off to you, excuse me, secretly want to return to an absolutist system where God's word rules above all because of a Christian feeling. But they know since it's 2019, they have to stay in line and mind their own business if they want to be accepted by society, let alone win votes, so that the closest thing they can cling to is the Republican Party. Just like how the commies are sticking with Bernie and Hillary. Well, why do people like religion? Because religion is a system that provides security, stability, and social order, or in this triangle, a blue moral value. But here's the interesting part. Within all the Western democracies, whether US, English colonies, Europe, the left, or rather the Reds, vehemently piss on the Christian blue and gets on their knees to profusely fillet the Islamic blue. How is this possible? Where's the jam in the gearbox? This is possible through an ideological bypass on two fronts. The politicians buy votes through immigrants since most are poor and will vote in exchange for welfare. The red politicians wax poetic about virtues like fighting racism, a code word for buying immigrant votes, fighting sexism, a code word for buying women's and feminist votes, and fighting income inequality, code for buying poor people's votes. Meanwhile, the common people, the common idiots that vote for these red politicians, think they're actually doing something they believe is right, thus stroking their hero complexes, despite actually doing things that will lead to not only their demise, but also the demise of their red and green values under the fist of Sharia law, one of the most blue ideologies on the planet today. The Christian blue and the Islamic blue cannot reconcile for obvious reasons, and the Greens want neither of the two to have power. Hopefully I'm wrong and we can break the cycle and keep our Western democracy, aka everybody's unhappy medium, which is a healthy balance between freedom and from governmental tyrants, protecting rights to speech, property, intellect, and wealth, equality before the law, and stability to prevent violence, which we fought so hard for so long to build in the first place. The white dot you see here, the EUM, is a mathematical compromise between the three extremities of this triangle, which I personally see as the best way forward. The only problem is that there's no objective means of measuring how much green, red, or blue is too much, so like in geometry class, the best we can do is split the triangle three ways and see where the dot lands, and that's where the point of best compromise is. And since EUM is the most fairly distributed configuration, and since bitch is gonna bitch, there's always gonna be someone who's not happy, And the only way to deal with those people who wants to disrupt this balance for their own interests is to tell them to shut up and go fuck themselves until we can reach a post-scarcity world where nobody has to fight over finite resources anymore.